The COVID-19 pandemic has had an impact on the film industry across the world and to varying degrees. Cinemas and movie theaters have been closed and film releases have been moved to future dates. Global box office has lost billions of dollars and the stock price of film exhibitors, publicly traded that is, have dropped dramatically. Many blockbusters originally scheduled to be released between March and November have been postponed or cancelled around the world, also with film productions being halted. Looking at how the pandemic has affected this sector, with focus on Nigeria, we have live in our studio Mr. Moses Babatope, the Secretary of the Cinema Exhibitors Association of Nigeria and also co-founder of Filmhouse Cinemas and FilmOne Entertainment. Good morning to you, Moses. Welcome to the Global Business Report on Arise News. I wanted to ask you if you can tell us if you can estimate in terms of Naira, what the cinema industry has lost, being closed down over this period.
Good morning to you, Rotus. Thank you for having us, for having me at the studio. It's been really challenging times for us in the cinema industry in Nigeria, as well as the country and the world at large. And as you know, the impact has been very heavy on the entertainment industry. For us, the impact has been felt from as early as February because of the perception coming in from China and in Europe. We got a softer than expected February. And as we're getting to March, once the first index case was reported in Nigeria, it then got more severe. We think that the estimate of losses or lost revenues to our sector will be in the region of 2 billion. If you look from mid-February to about now, you would have had films like the James Bond movie come out now in April. You would have had films like Fate of Alakada, one of the strong Nollywood films that was highly anticipated. You'd have had Mulan from Disney. You'd have had Bloodshot from Universal. You'd have had a number of films that would have really ticked up the box office at this time. If you consider that last year we took about 741 million in April, and April was the second busiest month of the year. Consider box office revenues, consider revenues from popcorn, from drinks, consider revenues from advertising, and all the ancillary revenues together. Easily about 2 billion in the last 8 weeks would have been lost as a result of COVID or COVID-related issues.
Okay, and looking ahead to whenever cinemas are able to reopen, what is the strategy? I mean, what have you thought of? Do you try and employ social distancing within theaters? How are you looking at how to tackle things in a post-COVID Nigeria for the cinema industry?
So, and that's the beauty of an association, and I'm grateful, that we have, a team of very progressive members, that have come together and have identified that it's by us all working together that we'll be able to try and, beat this challenge that we're currently facing. None of us have seen it coming before. And as such, once we knew that the situation was one we could not immediately, kind of like solve, we came together as a group and thought the responsible thing to do was to look at ways that will shut down cinemas on time. But also, beyond that, and that was pre the shutdown announced by the government, beyond that, we've been keeping in touch very regularly and talking about ways we can open and give our prospective audience a sense of safety. And for us, the strategy is about, working, with the key stakeholders, working with the government, to ensure that we are articulating, best practices, from our members, towards our guests, working with critical stakeholders, like the producers of films and distributors to ensure that we have good supply of product. But specifically to the safety points, like you said, we're working on things like, the capacity in our screens and, spacing out audiences, the capacity in our foyer. We're working on things like, sanitizers and temperature checks have got to be the minimum. We're working on ensuring that people wear face masks. Everything that would give the potential audience, like a sense of safety is what we're doing. We want them to come back and have, a differentiated experience. We want them to be immersed, and there's only one place to do it, is in the cinemas, but we also want them to know that they are safe while doing it.
Fantastic. Okay, I do want you to talk about the association, because you're the secretary, of course, of CIN, which is the Cinema Exhibitors Association of Nigeria. What is the mandate of the association?
So for the association, it's a trade association that basically looks after the interest of, all registered cinemas in the country. The idea is to tackle, collegial issues like piracy. It's also to address issues around, standards that we ought to be delivering to our guests. Is also to, kind of look at what best practices are, international global best practices are. There are also things around, music licensing and the use of it, and also interacting with other, trade organizations within the film sector. That's essentially what we're there for. As you know, the cinema industry has expanded and grown in the last 2-3 years, and we expect more growth. Even with the COVID challenge, we're very underserved, underscreened in the market. And so to have a valuable association is the right thing to do. We have very great, relationships with our regulators. Like I said, again, government relations are, again, some of the responsibilities of the association. So for us is to ensure that we bring our members together, ensure that we look after the interest and challenges that we all face as a sector, and do our best to make the recommendations that can help them thrive as a business.
Great stuff. Now, you mentioned earlier when I asked about the financial impact, estimates of about 2 billion naira. That's a lot. In your engagements with your stakeholders, like the government and so on, was there any talk of a bailout or any type of financial assistance for the cinema industry?
So I would like to say we're having very progressive conversations. I think in the first instance, I have to pay homage to the federal government and the committee announced yesterday. I think it's the first of its kind, in terms of identifying that the creative sector is an important part of the economy, and one that we should look at in terms of diversifying, the future prosperity of this country, and to see that the film industry and the TV and the various creative sectors are, well represented is a very, very good thing. And I think that's the great foundation to ensuring that the voices are heard. And I think that, we have a number of businessmen in that committee that can also put a good context to the impact, of ensuring that the creative sector is not, at the foot of the table. The creative sector is at the forefront. We're talking palliatives for medical care, palliatives for tech, palliatives for the banking institution and telcos. I'm sure, the creative sector, and particularly the film sector, would have a voice now. It's a sector that employs between 1 and 2 million Nigerians. So we're very hopeful. So while the committee is doing its thing, as an association, we're also engaging, ensuring that we're not leaving no stone unturned in terms of just being vocal. Another thing, we're ensuring that, again, like we're heard, more than ever before. And look, we can only be hopeful. We hope that we're prioritized, and we promise that, we will be able to deliver if given a chance to be able to kickstart our industry again.
All right, fantastic. Okay, we're also joined by Inu Abass, operations head at Viva Cinemas. Inu, you're welcome. I want to ask you about salary cuts and layoffs. So we've seen this happen in other industries, aviations, and everywhere, almost everywhere else in Nigeria. Have you witnessed the same? Have you had to make those hard decisions with regards to how the cinema industry has been affected by the lockdowns?
Thank you so much for having me. Can you hear me, please?
Yes, I can hear you. Go right ahead.
Okay, thank you so much for having me. The closure of cinemas globally is something that we have never experienced before. Like Moses has clearly said, businesses have shut down. Some businesses have been forced, some cinemas internationally have been forced to follow their staff, which in other words means they've been forced to put their staff on leave of absence, and some have gone the route of outright termination. In Nigeria, some cinemas have made a decision to follow their staff as a part of their long-term and business continuity plan. Viva Cinemas falls also in that category of the cinemas in Nigeria that has chosen not to follow it, not to outright sack or terminate its staff, but to follow their staff as a part of our business continuity plan. So which means that in the long term, when we're about to reopen the cinemas, We will not have to think about the cost or the overhead of training, staff recruitment, staff training, and all of that. We'll have our experienced staff on hand, on ground, at hand, to be able to drive cinemas, reignite the cinema business, and make sure that we reopen right. We reopen with the experienced staff, and we'll focus on our business priorities. So Viva Cinemas has not had to terminate anybody, and most cinemas in Nigeria have had to follow staff, which is a good strategy as of now.
All right, thank you for that. Moses, let me come to you. The film distribution aspect of the business, how has that been impacted?
So in terms of film distribution, you have to look at it two ways, and I have to also address it, I think more specifically because we're talking the cinema context. In terms of, because the cinemas have been closed, essentially no kind of theatrical distribution is happening. And around the world, that's what you're seeing. A lot of the big blockbusters have been moved. In fact, if the theatrical model has been challenged here and there, and maybe from a point of survival, for some of the distributors. For us, we also have a sister body, the Film Distributors Association of Nigeria, FIDAN. We've not been able to get any product, into the cinema. So it's been a really, really trying time. That said, the digital space has been a real opportunity for our films. The ability to show our films on global platforms like Amazon, like Netflix, like Iroko, and Africa Magic, on TV, also presents an opportunity and an alternative. And for us in the sector, it also helps to kind of solidify the revenue streams, or can I also say diversify the revenue streams? So it's kind of like a mix bag of emotions for film distributors. Whereas the cinema would have been a great complementary and introductory revenue stream, it's not there. We've seen an increase in digital consumption, and I think that we'll see a lot of growth in that area. The prayer is that for cinemas to come back, so that we'll see a real boost, in terms of, revenues generated for quality content, that we can continue to invest in the sector and grow it.
Fantastic. All right, we have Joy Odiete, who is the president of the Film Distribution Association of Nigeria. But we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back with our panel talking about the impact of the cinema industry from COVID-19. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Global Business Report on Arise News. We're talking with a panel of representatives from the cinema industry in Nigeria and talking about the impact of COVID-19 on the cinema industry, as well as how the lockdowns have affected things. We're just joined, of course, by Joy Odiete, who is the president, Film Distributors Association of Nigeria, and the MD of Blue Pictures. Joy, you're welcome. I wanted to ask you, in a post-COVID-19 Nigeria, is there any adjustments that the cinema industry can make that does not result in lower profitability? I'll give you an example. In the aviation industry, a consulting firm called Simple Flying, I believe, or Simplify, said that the changes that would have to happen in aviations would increase the amount of time people wait to get on a flight, would cause social distancing in planes, which will reduce the amount of people that can fly in planes, which will reduce profitability for the airlines. So do you see the same thing for cinemas, in that are there any changes that can be made that wouldn't result in lower profitability for cinemas like yours going forward?
Okay, thank you for having me. For the cinemas right now, as it is, we must understand, first of all, that these are uncertain times. So because they are uncertain times, there are so many things that will not really work the way they ought to work in an ideal situation. I'll give you a scenario. Normally, cinemas do projections, and their projections most times can be, it's most time based on revenues that they're anticipating to get in cinemas from, viewers. Now, if we take an ideal situation of like a 35% occupancy rate for cinemas, and that's pre-COVID, we have like 35%. And then after COVID, we are having like 20-25%. So that means the cinemas have to readjust their projections to reflect 20 to 25% of occupancy rate. At that 25%, you discover that due to social distancing and all, which will obviously impact the cinemas, in terms of seating, which, is part of what, we've been discussing internally. At 20 to 25%, it is impossible for us to talk about profitability at that level. And really, right now, we as an association, we are not looking at profitability. We are actually looking at survival. So from that 20 to 25%, we are looking at, paying off your rent, doing your service charge, paying your staff, paying distributors, and having your bank repayments, pay suppliers, pay your taxes, and also maintain your cinema. So I would say, as a platform and as cinemas, it is impossible for us to talk about profitability. It will definitely impact us. That's what I have to say.
Thank you for that. Thank you so much, Joy. All right, Moses, I'm going to come back to you, Moses. There's been suggestions that Nigerian cinemas should pivot to drive-through cinemas, where people are, it's used in the West, or those cinemas exist in the West, where you're in your car, you drive up to a big screen, and then you are served your popcorn and drinks in your car, and you're just confined to your car. How practical is that? I'd like to get your thoughts.
So we've been hearing a lot of that in the last few years. To be honest, even before COVID came in. Look, my personal, and it is very personal in my opinion, I think it's complementary. I think it's worth exploring. Is it the answer to cinemas going forward? I don't believe so. I think that there is a whole logistic point that you have to look at, in terms of the content supply, in terms of the screen setup, in terms of the premises, in terms of the ticketing, in terms of, again, preparing the popcorn, in terms of health and safety, and look, like with every other business, there are outdoor businesses, that thrive very well. I think that it's a welcome development. Can it work? I think so. I don't know whether it will be something that would be regular. I think there are limitations around, for example, how viable would it be during the day, as opposed to evenings. If we maintain this curfew regime that we have to do to help combat COVID, how viable would it be economically? So there are a number of question marks around it. But I think it's good that we're thinking. In the post-COVID world, we've got to be innovative. We've got to put our thinking hats on. If it means that we can find ways, we can work with vendors and suppliers that can put this kind of structures together, why not? Let's see how it works. Like I said, I don't see it competing with the cinema experience, the shared communal experience. I don't see how watching in the car beats an experience of watching in a darkened auditorium, with big sound, big picture, and the controlled elements, no rain, no, issues of weather affected. So those are like I said, my personal thoughts on drive-in cinema. By no means combating it. I think it's complementary at best.
Okay, and Inu, let me throw this question to you with regards to streaming. I'm actually going to throw it to Moses, but I'll come back to get Moses' thoughts on that. Inu, with regards to streaming services, are you in the cinema industry worried that perhaps maybe due to a fear of going back to the cinemas because of the virus, are you worried about cinema goers or movie watchers going over to streaming services and watching on your Netflixes and Arise Play or other streaming services that are out there? Does that worry you as a cinema industry insider?
Okay, there has been a lot of, several people have given a lot of thoughts, shared their opinions about streaming services versus cinemas. Now, cinema, first and foremost, we need to understand that cinema offers a different kind of experience entirely. And as at 2 weeks ago, a survey was done towards finding out the thoughts of cinema goers. And 76%, this is international survey, 76% of people that that participated in the survey indicated that cinemas were still a strong entertainment platform for them. In other words, they prefer cinemas over streaming services. Why? Because of the collective experience that cinema gives, because of the big screen experience that cinema gives, and most importantly, because of the escapism that cinema gives. Streaming services have come to at this moment, it's something that has filled the gap in entertainment. It has gotten people engaged, has gotten people, occupied during this COVID period. But are streaming services going to be able to sustain the entertainment industry? No. Cinema still has a very strong role to play, and streaming services cannot change that. Don't forget, just to buttress what Moses has said, drive-in cinemas has a real resurgence in United States. In other words, it had been done and tested before now. But in Nigeria, it has to be a totally new experience if we have to go towards drive-in, which means that the research has not been done, it has not been tested, so we cannot categorically say it's going to be a success. And don't forget, after drive-in cinemas, pay TV came in, streaming services came, DVD came in. All of these things are alternative ways for people to be entertained. Streaming services is one of those entertainment ways and ways of creating alternative entertainment, but it cannot compete with cinemas. And to give an example, as we speak, cinemas in South Korea have reopened. Most of them have reopened, and they recorded 100,000 admissions on April 30th, which shows promise for the cinema industry, really. It shows promise that admissions will rise, admissions will increase when cinemas open globally.
Fantastic. Thank you for that passionate response as to cinema interest still being there. Thank you for that, Inu. Moses, so I have to go to the final word. We're out of time, but about a minute or less, please. Your outlook for 2020 for the cinema industry.
My outlook for 2020, we've got to be realistic. We can be very passionate and we can be, very optimistic. The truth is, I think that there's still some challenging times ahead. I think it will be short-term pain, long-term gain. There is definitely, as one of my very good friends, in the international industry says, that it's going to be a real global resurgence for the cinema industry. I think that Nigeria is in a very, very, very important place for that. We have a strong local content market that is going to be the driver of that. But beyond that, as a people, innate in us is communal, is to fellowship, is to have time together. That's why we have the biggest churches. That's why we have the biggest clubs, the greatest entertainment scene. I think that's what you're going to see thrive and happen for the cinema industry. So I think it's positive. End of 2020 and beyond, we're going to see a great time for this industry.
All right. My big thanks to Moses Babatope, Secretary of the Cinema Exhibitors Association of Nigeria and co-founder of Filmhouse Cinemas and FilmOne Entertainment, and Joy Odiete, President, Film Distributors Association of Nigeria, MD Blue Pictures, and Inu Abass, Operations Head at Viva Cinemas. Thank you so much for your thoughts there.